Okay. This is chapter 8. How they left the island. Because we're flashing back over to Peter and the gang, and Lucy and Susan and Edmund. And so, said Trumpkin, for as you have realized, it was he who had been telling this story to the 4 children, sitting in the grass of the ruined hall of Cair Paravel. And so I put a crust or 2 in my pocket, left behind all weapons but my dagger, and took to the woods. In the gray of morning I had been plunging away for many hours. Then there came a sound that I'd never heard the like of in my born days. I won't forget that. The whole air was full of it, loud as thunder, but far longer, cool and sweet, as music over water, but strong enough to shake the woods. And I said to myself, if that's not the horn, call me a rabbit. And a moment later, I wondered why he hadn't blown it sooner. What time was it? Asked Edmund. Between 9 and 10 of the clock, said Trumpkin. Just when we were at the railway station, said all the children, and looked at one another with shining eyes. Please go on, said Lucy to the dwarf. Well, as I was saying, I wondered, but I went on as hard as I could pelt. I kept on all night, and then, when it was half light, this morning, as if I'd no more sense than a giant, I risked a short cut across open country to cut off a big loop of the river, and was caught. Not by the army, but by a pompous old fool who has charge of a little castle which is Miraz's last stronghold toward the coast. I needn't tell you they got no true tale out of me, but I was a dwarf, and that was enough. But lobsters and lollipops, it is a good thing the seneschal was a pompous fool. Anyone else would have run me through there and then, but nothing would do for him short of grand execution, sending me down to the ghosts in the full ceremonial way. And then this young lady, he nodded at Susan, does her bit of archery, and it was pretty shooting, let me tell you. And here we are, and without my armor, for of course they took that, he knocked out and refilled his pipe. Great Scott, said Peter. So it was all the horn, your own horn, Sue, that dragged us all off that seat on the platform yesterday morning. I can hardly believe it, yet it all fits in. I don't know why you shouldn't believe it, said Lucy. If you believe in magic at all, aren't there lots of stories about magic forcing people out of one place and out of one world into another? I mean, when a magician in the Arabian Nights calls up a gem, it has to come. We had to come, just like that. Yes, said Peter. I suppose that makes it feel so queer in the stories, it's always someone in our world who does the calling. One doesn't really think about where the djinn comes from. And now we know what it feels like for the djinn, said Edmund with a chuckle. Golly, it's a bit uncomfortable. So to know that we can be whistled for like that. There should be a comma there. It's worse than what Father says about living at the mercy of the telephone. But we want to be here, don't we? Said Lucy, if Aslan wants us. Meanwhile, said the dwarf, what are we to do? I suppose I'd better go back to the king, Caspian, and tell him no help has come. No help, said Susan, but it has worked, and here we are. Yes, to be sure, I see that, said the dwarf, whose pipe seemed to be blocked. At any rate, he made himself very busy cleaning it. But don't you yet see who we are? Shouted Lucy. You are stupid. I suppose you are the 4 children out of the old story, said Trumpkin, and I'm very glad to meet you, of course, and it's very interesting, no doubt, but no offense, and he hesitated again. Do get on and say whatever you're going to say, said Edmund. Well then, no offense, said Trumpkin, but you know, the king and Truffle Hunter and Dr. Cornelius were expecting, well, if you see what I mean, help, to put it another way. To think they'd be imagining you as great warriors. As it is, we're awful fond of children and all that, but just for the moment, in the middle of the war, but I'm sure you understand. You mean you think we're no good, said Edmund. getting red in the face. Now, pray don't be offended, interrupted the dwarf. I assure you, my dear little friends, little from you is really a bit too much. Oh my God, Edmund. Chill out, dude. Edmund's being ableist. I suppose you don't believe we won the Battle of Baruna? Well, you can say what you like about me, because I know there's no good losing our tempers, said Peter. Let's fit him out with fresh armor and fit ourselves out from the treasure chamber, and then have a talk about it. I don't quite see the point, began Edmund, but Lucy whispered at his ear, Had we better do what Peter says? He is the High King, you know, and I think he has an idea. So Edmund agreed, and by the aid of his torch, they all, including Trumpkin, went down the steps again into the dark coldness and dusty splendor of the treasure house. The dwarf's eyes glistened as he saw the wealth that lay at the shelves, though he had no stand on tiptoes to do so. And he muttered to himself, it would never do to let Knickerbock see this, never. They found easily enough a mail shirt for him, a sword, a helmet, a shield, and a bow, and a quiver full of arrows, all of the dwarfish size. The helmet was of copper, set with rubies, and there was gold on the hilt of the sword. Trumpkin had never seen, much less carried, so much wealth in all his life. The children also put on mail shirts, and helmets, and swords and shields were found for Edmund, and a bow for Lucy. Peter and Susan were, of course, already carrying their gifts. As they came back up the stairway, jingling in their mail, and already looking and feeling more like Narnians and less like schoolchildren, the two boys were behind, apparently making some plan. Lucy heard Edmund say, No, let me do it. It will be more sucks for him if I win, and less of a letdown for us all if I fail. All right, Ed, said Peter. Then, when they came out into the daylight, Edmund turned to the dwarf very politely and said, I've got something for you. Kids like us don't often have the chance of meeting a great warrior like you. Would you have a little fencing match with me? It would be frightfully decent. But lad, said Trumpkin, these swords are sharp. I know, said Edmund, but I'll never get anywhere near you, and you'll be quite clever enough to disarm me without doing me any damage. It's a dangerous game, said Trumpkin, but since you make such a point of it, I'll try a pass or two. Both swords were out in a moment, and the three others jumped off the dais, and stood watching. It was well worth it, and it was not like the silly fighting you see with broad swords on the stage. It was not even like the rapier fighting which you sometimes see rather better done. This was a real broad sword fighting. The great thing is to slash at your enemy's legs and feet because they are the part that have no armor. And when he slashes at yours, you jump with both feet on the ground so that his blow goes under them. This gave the dwarf an advantage because Edmund, being much taller, had to be always stooping. I don't think Edmund would have had a chance if he had fought Trumpkin 24 hours earlier, but the heir of Narnia had been working upon him ever since they arrived in the island, and all his old battles came back to him, and his arms and fingers remembered their old skills. He was King Edmund once more. Round and round the two combatants circled. Stroke after stroke they gave, and Susan, who could never learn to like this sort of thing, shouted out, Oh, do be careful. And then, so quickly that no one, unless they knew as Peter did, could quite see how it happened. Edmund finished his sword round with a peculiar twist. The dwarf's sword flew out of his grip, and Trumpkin was wringing his empty hands as to go after a sting from a cricket bat. Not her, I hope, my dear little friend, said Edmund. Damn, he's being ableist again. Panting a little and returning his own sword to its sheath. I see the point, said Trumpkin dryly. You know a trick I never learned. That's quite true, said Peter. The best swordsman in the world may be disarmed by a trick that's new to him. I think it's only fair to give Trumpkin a chance at something else. Will you have a shooting match with my sister? There are no tricks in archery, you know. Ah, you jokers you are, said the dwarf. I begin to see. If I didn't know how she can shoot, after what happened this morning, all the same, I'll have a try. He spoke gruffly, but his eyes brightened, and for a famous bowman among his own people. All 5 of them came out of this courtyard. What's to be the target? Asked Peter. I think that apple hanging over there on the wall of the branch there would do, said Susan. That'll do nicely, lass, said Trumpkin. You mean the yellow one near the middle of the arch? No, not that, said Susan. The red one, up above. over the battlement. The dwarf's face fell. "Looks more like a cherry than an apple," he muttered, but he said nothing out loud. They tossed up the first shot, gently to the near interest of Trumpkin, who had never seen a coin tossed before, and Susan lost. They were to shoot from the top of the steps that lead from the hall into the courtyard. Everyone could see from the way the dwarf took his position and handled his bow that he knew what he was about. Twang went the string. It was an excellent shot. The tiny apple shook as the arrow passed, and a leaf came fluttering down. Then Susan went to the top of the steps and strung her bow. She was not enjoying her match half so much as Edmund had enjoyed his, not because she had any doubt about hitting the apple, but because Susan was so tender-hearted that she was almost hated to beat someone who had been beaten already. The dwarf watched her keenly as she drew the shaft to her ear. A moment later, with a little soft thump, which they could all hear in their quiet place, the apple fell to the grass with Susan's arrow in it. "Oh, well done, Sue," shouted the other children. "It wasn't really any better than yours," said Susan to the dwarf. "I think there was a tiny breath of wind as you shot." "No, there wasn't," said Trumpkin. "Don't tell me. I know when I'm fairly beaten. I won't even say that the scar of my last wound catches me a bit when I get my arm well back." "Oh, are you wounded?" asked Lucy. "Do let me look." "It's not a sight for little girls," began Trumpkin, but then he suddenly checked himself. "There I go talking like a fool again," he said. "I suppose you're as likely to be a great surgeon as your brother was to be a great swordsman, or your sister to be a great archer." He sat down on the steps and took off his hauberk and slipped down his little shirt, showing an arm, hairy and muscular, in proportion, as a sailor's though not much bigger than a child's. There was a clumsy bandage on the shoulder, which Lucy proceeded to unroll. Underneath, the cut looked very nasty, and there was a good deal of swelling. "Oh, poor Trumpkin," said Lucy. "How horrid!" Then she carefully dripped into one single drop of the cordial from her flask. "Hello? What have you done?" said Trumpkin. But however he turned his head and squinted and whisked his beard to and fro, he couldn't quite see his own shoulder. Then he felt as well as he could, getting his arms and fingers into very difficult positions, as you do when you're trying to scratch a place that is just out of reach. Then he swung his arms and raised it, and tried the muscles, and finally jumped to his feet, crying, "Giants and junipers, it's cured. It's as good as new." After that he burst into great laugh and said, "Well, I've made as big a fool of myself as ever a dwarf did. No offense, I hope. My humble duty to your majesty's all humble duty, and thanks for my life, my cure, my breakfast, and my lesson." The children all said it was quite all right, and not to mention it. "And now," said Peter, if you've really decided to believe in us." "I have," said the dwarf. "It's quite clear what we have to do. We must join King Caspian at once. The sooner the better," said Trumpkin. "My being such a fool has already wasted about an hour." "It's about 2 days' journey, the way you came," said Peter. "For us, I mean. We can't walk all day and night like you dwarves." Then he turned to the others. "What Trumpkin calls Aslan's How is obviously the stone table itself. You remember it was about half a day's march, or a little less, from there down to the fords of Beruna." "Beruna's Bridge, we call it," said Trumpkin. "There was no bridge in our time," said Peter. "And then, from Beruna down to here was another day a bit. We used to get home about tea time on a second day going easily. Going hard, we could do the whole thing in a day and a half, perhaps." "But remember, it's all woods now," said Trumpkin, "and there are enemies to dodge." "Look here," said Edmund. "Need we go by the same way that our dear little friend came?" "No more of that, your majesty, if you love me," said the dwarf. "Very well," said Edmund. "May I see our DLF?" "Oh, Edmund," said Susan, "don't keep on him at all like that." "That's all right, lass. I mean, your majesty," said Trumpkin with a chuckle. "A jibe won't raise a blister." And after that, they often called him the DLF. I don't understand what that means here. May I say our DLF? Our dwarf something? Or like dwarf something friend? I don't know. "As I was saying," continued Edmund, "we needn't go that way. Why shouldn't we row a little south till we came to the Glasswater Creek and row up it? That brings us behind the hill of the stone table, and we'll be safe while we're at sea. If we start at once, we can be at the head of the glass water before dark. Get a few hours sleep, and be with Caspian pretty early tomorrow." "What a thing it is to know the coast," said Trumpkin. "None of us know anything about glass water." "What about food?" asked Susan. "Oh, we'll have to do with apples," said Lucy. "Do let's get on. We've done nothing yet, and we've been trying nearly for 2 days. And anyway, no one's going to have my hat for a fish basket again," said Edmund. They used only the raincoats as a kind of bag and put a good many apples in it. Then they all had a good long drink at a well, for they would meet no more fresh water till they landed at the head of the creek, and went down to the boat. The children were sorry to leave Cape Paravel, which even in ruins had begun to feel like home again. The DLF had better steer," said Peter, "and Ed and I will take our oar each. Half a moment, though. We'd better take off our mail. We're going to be pretty warm before we're done. The girls had better to be on the bows and shout directions to the DLF, because he doesn't know the way. You'd better get us fair way out to sea till we've passed the island." As soon as the green wooded coast of the island is falling away behind them, and its little bays and headlands were beginning to look flatter, and the boat was rising and falling in the gentle swell, the sea began to grow bigger around them, and in the distance bluer. But close around the boat it was green and bubbly. Everything smelled salt, and there was no noise except swishing of water and clop-clop of water against the sides of the splash of the oars and the jolting noise of the rowlocks. The sun grew hot. It was delightful as Lucy and Susan in the bows, bending over the edge and trying to get their hands in the sea, which they could never quite reach. The bottom, mostly pure pale sand, but with occasional patches of purple seaweed, could be seen beneath them. "It's like old times," said Lucy. "Do you remember our voyage to Terabithia? Terabithia. I wonder when Bridge to Terabithia came out. Is this a rep? Which one's? Anyway. And Gelma, the 7 Isles, and the Lone Islands." "Yes," said Susan. "And our great ship, the Splendor Highline, with the swan's head at her prow and carved swan's wings coming back amongst her waist. And the silken sails and the great stern lanterns, and the feasts and the poop, on the poop, like the poop deck, and the musicians. Do you remember when we had the musicians up in the rigging playing flutes so that it sounded like music out of the sky?" Pleasantly, Susan took over Edmund's oar, and he came forward to join Lucy. They had passed the island now and stood closer to the shore, all wooded and deserted. They would have thought it was very pretty if they had not remembered the time when it was open and breezy and full of merry friends. "Phew, this is pretty grueling work," said Peter. "Can't I row for a bit?" said Lucy. "The oars are too big for you," said Peter shortly, not because he was cross, but because he had no strength to spare for talking. And that is all of Chapter 8. That one kind of felt like a long one. And next time is Chapter 9, which is called What Lucy Saw.